Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the 5th Annual King Talks. My name is Paul Artale, and I am the Manager for Graduate Student Engagement here at the Rackham Graduate School. I'd like to take a brief moment to tell you about the history of this event. The King Talks were created in 2017 with two specific objectives in mind. First, we wanted Rackham's contribution to the MLK Symposium to be notable and memorable, and as an annual tradition that grew and evolved. Second, we wanted it to exclusively feature Rackham graduate students sharing their expertise. Over the past 5 years, this program has featured over 26 graduate students as our featured speakers. This year, the program evolved once again as King Talks alumni took the lead and coached the speakers you will see here tonight. These alumni will also serve as your co-MCs tonight. Those alumni are Waller-Bey and Luyet, who were both King Talk speakers in 2020. Chloe is a PhD candidate in chemical engineering. Her King Talk was entitled How Antibiotics Have Failed Us, the Food Industry's Role in a Global Epidemic. Aya is a PhD candidate in sociology. Her King Talk, No Pain, No Gain, Sharing Trauma to Get In. I highly encourage you to watch these incredible talks, which are featured on the Rackham King Talks page, and the link will be coming in the chat very shortly. On a personal note, I'd like to thank Chloe and Aya for their work on the King Talks this year as coaches. Since October, they have mentored, challenged, and evolved tonight's speakers. Thank you so much. At this time, I would like to turn this event over to your MC and first call upon Aya Waller-Bey to introduce our first speaker.
Thank you so much, Paul, for the wonderful introduction. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker, Leesi George-Komi, a PhD student in movement science in the School of Kinesiology. So throughout the evening, we will actually be sharing fun facts about our speakers. So Leesi's fun fact is that he won Most Likely to Appear on American Idol in 8th grade. So Leesi is a man of many talents, and tonight his talk is titled Cultural Reckoning, Anxiety, Racism, and Moving Ahead. Between recent rising mental health discussions and racist rhetoric, it can be argued that America is going through a major self-reckoning. This talk investigates the underlying influences of anxiety and racism within American culture and explores how individuals in the country can move ahead. Without further ado, Leesi.
Anxiety. It is defined as an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes, like increased blood pressure and shortness of breath. Now, feelings of anxiety are normal, and we've all experienced it at one time or another, be it during your first test or competition, or maybe you were anxious walking down a dark hallway or walking into a room of your peers, or maybe you were anxious at home giving your first King Talk. Yeah, those feelings are bound to come and go. They're temporary. But imagine if those feelings during those temporary moments weren't so temporary. Imagine that they grew into a consistent worry and fear, becoming an ongoing and underlying part of your life. Now, when checked over time, these can develop into anxiety disorders, which are much more common than you think, with over 40 million adults in the US suffering from one of these anxiety disorders listed here. Now, that's a bit more than 18% of our population, and that trend is only increasing globally. The WHO reports that anxiety disorders are the most common mental health disorders worldwide, with 1 in 13 people globally suffering from anxiety. Now, more specifically, Dr. Danny Pine of the Child Mind Institute and National Institute of Mental Health told NPR reporters that 1 in 5 children will experience some kind of clinical level anxiety by the time they're adolescents. 1 in 5. That's like if you were to look down at your feet and look at your toes, one of those little piggies is going to therapy. Now, for me, I literally needed to start my speech by saying the word anxiety because I've realized that without identifying what I'm going through, it's almost impossible for me to move ahead. Now, that idea is echoed in a quote by the head of the Radcliffe Institute of Advanced Study, Dean Tomiko Brown-Nagin, who said that we must reckon with this reality before we begin to move ahead. Now, she said this during a discussion about a similarly pervasive issue in America. And I'm gonna give you guys a couple of seconds to just drop in the chat what you think she was talking about. But if you cheated and looked ahead at my title of my speech, you'll already know that she was talking about racism and how embedded it is in American life. Now, we're going to get back to the idea of racism, but this is important here because researchers have shown that anxiety disorders are in part correlated to several early and often unaddressed negative childhood experiences. Now, one influential experience from my childhood that took time for me to reckon with was the experience I had at Logos and how it differed from my elementary school experiences in Clarkston. Now, Logos, if you don't know, was a weekly after-school program in my predominantly white Presbyterian church in Tucker, Georgia. And as you can see, it's only about 15 minutes away from my elementary school area of Clarkston. Now, a quick Google search will show you that Clarkston is known as the Ellis Island of the South and the most diverse square mile in the US. It's a town of 13,000 with 40 different nationalities, speaking 60 different languages. Clarkston was a place where my family, refugees from Nigeria, could feel seen and valued. Because here we were all refugees and immigrants. And even if you weren't, it's likely that your neighbor was. But when I would step outside of my mom's car every Wednesday to go to Logos, I knew that I had to prepare myself for different expectations and perceptions because none of the other kids there looked like me. Now, let me be clear. I don't want to allude to my Logos peers as being racist or bullies in comparison to my Clarkston people, because in fact, they were my friends and we played and ate together like all kids did. But it was in this space, I was always conscious that I was an outsider, an other. And that inexplicably came with the feeling that who I was didn't matter as much as what others thought of me or how they viewed me, both the kids and the adults. Now, rarely do we consider the racial biases of children and how those ideas might impact their peers. But did you know that infants can differentiate between races? And by the time they're 2, they've been able to use racial categories to reason about people's behaviors. And by the time kids are 3 to 5, they're expressing bias based on race. Now, I didn't really need these stats growing up because, well, I was Black. And I was just hyper aware that I was different, constantly feeling observed and perceived a certain way because of my race and nationality. It made every decision that I made at Logos feel that much more important. I felt that to them, I was a Black Nigerian representative, a symbol. My small actions would ripple, defining their ideologies of an entire race. From classes to sports, I would worry about how my actions would rub against their own perceptions. Like if we played any games together, I would not only worry about my team, but I'd also worry that the other team would think it was unfair that my team got the Black guy. And I was worried that they'd hate me for it. The amount of times a younger Leesi would let my Logos friends do things like beat me in a foot race or say that I was struggling more in school just so that they could have the feeling and elation of having done better than me in something is something that I reflect on often. I feel a complicated pity for the already DEI concerned younger me, but childhood experiences like those, rooted in a constant fear of being othered and perceived differently, developed into what my first psychiatrist explained was social anxiety. Now, unfortunately, this problem is much bigger than me, and my singular experience serves as a scarily accurate reflection of larger American society, where those who feel or are perceived as differently are largely left to fend for themselves. Rather than society reckoning with their mistreatment of others, it's those who have been mistreated who are perpetually doomed to combat society's negative perceptions. Now, a story in this same vein, but often left untold, is that of the immortal Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who tried to cut his own life short twice before the age of 13. A legend, even as great as he, suffered from bouts of poor mental health, and we still don't discuss this as a community. Even after his childhood suicide attempts, during his rise to prominence as the MLK that we know today, he still felt the need to hide his mental health struggles because of fears of how he was perceived by the very community he was aiming to save. we have failed to reckon with that reality. And it is difficult to address issues we can't properly identify. My feeling of being othered wasn't something that I could properly face without identifying the anxiety associated with it. Now, not only did it take identifying, but reckoning with that reality and realizing that if left unchecked, it would continue to grow into a heavier burden. Now, this is similar to racism in this country. Racism is a pervasive and underlying issue that severely impacts how many people live their daily lives. And much like anxiety, the prevalence of racism must be something that we as a country begin to truly reckon with. It means properly identifying what it looks like in our daily lives, what institutions it's been pervasive in, and agreeing to no longer leave it unchecked. If we can't reckon with the reality of our current situation as a nation where, despite the progress it's made since Dr. King has seen racially motivated hate crimes against minorities rise within the last few years, a nation where anxiety and depression are growing despite widespread discussions about mental health. This is our America. And if we can't sit down as people and as a nation and begin to truly come to terms with our reality, then we risk being forever stagnant, weighed down from our past while attempting to propel into our future. I believe that a cultural reckoning is necessary. And the first steps to solving any problem is recognizing that there is one. And so we need to look inward and see how negative experiences in our past have shaped our perception of those around us, influenced our actions, and ultimately halted our progress. So, if that is the first step, then what should we do next? After reckoning with our own personal reality and the reality of this nation, how do we move ahead to build a better tomorrow? Now, if there was an infallible answer, I'm certain Dr. King would have yelled it from that famous mountaintop. However, I do have a suggestion for how we should start. And that is to namely use our lived experiences, your stories, both the good and the bad, to inspire those around you so that they may have the tools to create a better reality too. Now, what does that look like? Well, for me, my previous experiences at Logos and others have helped shape my current path, turning it into an almost cathartic journey of realization and purpose. I've learned to channel who I am, what has shaped me, anxieties and all, into the beginnings of a career focused on creating interventions for children, aimed at improving their mental and physical health, especially those in minority groups like myself. Now, my experiences may not be the same as yours, but I hope that I have inspired you all to understand that the uniqueness of each and every one of our lived experiences provides us all with the knowledge and wisdom to help those around us. We all have overcome hurdles and obstacles in our lives that we wouldn't wish on others. So it is our responsibility to make sure that we can improve the circumstances of our community and of our nation. Now, while my charge is for all of us to pour into others, it is equally important to ensure that you keep your own cup full as well. In order to move ahead and build the prosperous and equitable nation that Dr. King envisioned, we must have the resources to reckon with the reality of our present. Now, dealing with anxiety, racial inequalities, traumas, these can be hard. And if you need some support, here are a few tools to help with mental health and wellness. Now, as we get ready to listen to the remainder of these incredible talks today, and then you go on to live your individual lives, I challenge you all to simply remember that our past does not define us. However, our present does, as individuals and as a nation. But if we can properly use our present to better understand the underlying influences of our past, then I believe that we can build a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Leesi. Our next speaker today is Michelle Marin, a master's student in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning. In her talk, How Our Physical Spaces Demonize and Criminalize the Poor, Michelle observes how features of the built environment around us are created to exclude those of us from lower economic statuses. She invites us to start scrutinizing the physical spaces in our own communities. In her free time, Michelle enjoys hiking, weightlifting, home renovation, and playing soccer. Michelle is a former high school science teacher and has visited 49 US states. Take it away, Michelle.
The stores put the security cameras in the laundry aisle. There's a forceful narrative that exists in America. Its message is sent to you through the government, businesses, churches, your family. The message is that the worst thing you can be is poor. Even those who believe you've transcended those problematic, toxic thoughts surrounding money and personal value are terrified of any event that poses the risk of plunging you into financial ruin. Innumerable industries thrive on knowing that most of us will do whatever it takes to prevent being or appearing poor. Capitalism-induced competition infiltrates every level of our formal systems and drives you to pursue money first and purpose second. The idea that making or having less money means that we contribute or are worth less is not only integrated into our systems, but also into the physical spaces that surround us. Many of the private and public spaces in our community are designed to exclude and demonize the poor. One way this is accomplished is through laws which dictate space. Take zoning regulations. In communities across the country, including progressive Ann Arbor until this past September, zoning laws prohibit home-based businesses. A survey of city planners reported that less than half of cities in the US permit home-based businesses. So sure, anyone can start a business, but if you don't already have the means and ability to open up your own storefront, recording studio, salon, or daycare in a designated commercial space, then it's often made illegal for you to operate. This barrier to entrepreneurship targets lower income individuals, curating a community where the poor are excluded from business enterprise. But local laws aren't just created to shame and exclude the poor from business, but from leisure too. Spaces like this landscaped plaza pictured here are created on both public and private land for folks to gather or simply relax. These central spaces contribute to a lively community. They play host to concerts, farmers markets, and other wholesome fun. Adjacent businesses benefit even though no purchase is required to use these. But look closer at this sign. Loitering is prohibited. Loitering means to occupy a space without purpose. This space was constructed for loitering. So who do you imagine the sign is targeted at? Loitering laws are deliberately vague and create a way to restrict access to public space in order to justify discrimination. The National Coalition for the Homeless assessed almost 250 cities in the US. 47% ban loitering in all public spaces. Fewer places ban you from driving a fully functional tank down a major roadway or from leaving a baby alone in a car. Loitering does not include panhandling, disturbing the peace, lying down, or begging. Essentially, in practice, loitering is to exist in public while poor. I was in a public library recently, and a man who had fallen asleep at one of the tables while reading was politely asked to leave by a librarian. I was confused. He wasn't snoring, which I thought would have been the only rationale for asking a sleeping person to leave the library, since the central library tenet is shh. The man left without kicking up a fuss. This wasn't the first time he was asked to leave a public space for loitering. But sometimes loitering laws are too vague to enforce in facilities that have the word public directly embedded, such as the public library. Earlier this month, Redondo Beach, California, began enforcing rules specifically created to prevent homeless people from patronizing libraries, while simultaneously taking steps to close homeless shelters. Cities across the US have local laws limiting the rights and dignity of the poor and the homeless. But when laws can't be justified, conscious design fills in. People often remark on a neighborhood's safety by indicating how many and how often, if ever, there are homeless people around. Have you ever wondered why homeless people don't really spend much of their time in rich neighborhoods with, nicer parks, more trees, less traffic? Maybe you live in one of these neighborhoods. Being homeless is not only more likely to be criminalized in elite neighborhoods, but the spaces are less physically comfortable. For a number of bizarre reasons, I found myself living on a construction site in one of the richest towns in the US for a couple of years in my mid-20s. Every home was, of course, individually gated, but there was also no sidewalks, not a single sidewalk in the whole town. And there was only one public park. This town even went so far as to restrict the whole municipality's zoning to only residential, single-family residential. There are no businesses or facilities to patronize, no paths to stroll along, so that anyone who doesn't live there is vulnerable to questioning and demonization. This model of elite exclusion is replicated across the globe. The man napping in the library obviously wasn't welcome to sleep in that indoor public space. So where do you imagine is a welcoming outdoor space for him to sleep? Hostile architecture in public spaces has substantially ramped up in the past 15 years, with most cities placing virtually no restrictions on the hostility. Cities across the US invest hundreds of thousands of dollars to add spikes, studs, and other barriers to relaxing in public. But in 2007, the city of New York banned hostile architecture features that prohibit sitting. Many municipalities followed suit. But what is not included in this policy? Armrests. Here are some public benches that I passed in the last couple of months. At first glance, the middle of the bench armrest might appear to simply be extra support for our tired arms. But the real message is that this bench is for sitting, not lying down, and certainly not for sleeping. These are conscious design decisions made to discriminate against the poor. So let's say you decide to stop by a local restaurant to take a seat and relax. Many fast food restaurants keep the drive-thru open at night after the dining room is closed. Hey, if it lets folks get their Crunchwrap Supreme at 3 a.m., then that's capitalism actually working. But many fast food restaurants, including McDonald's, explicitly disallow walking through the drive-thru. This used to only really be a problem. It used to really only infringe on the accessibility of late-night munchies. But since the pandemic began, many restaurants have kept the dining room closed all the time, including this KFC around the corner from my house. People impacted by this drive-through only model include anyone who doesn't drive a car, truck drivers, bicycle riders, walkers. But KFC wants you to know that they still value the customer. The signs on the window are clear. The dining room may be closed, but we can still serve you. You just need a car to go through the drive-thru. No car? No problem. You can order online with your smartphone. No smartphone? You better get off our property. Speaking of smartphones, does anyone else hate the new need to use a QR code for everything? Taking out my phone to access basic information that could just be on a sign in museums and restaurants is so frustrating. I recently passed this middle post in a large public park. Clearly, a larger, presumably more informative sign was previously posted, but it seems to have been replaced by this smaller sign below, encouraging you to just use your smartphone. Since March 2020, QR code downloads have soared by almost 1,000%, despite most of us spending most of that time at home. To folks like me who have a smartphone but aren't keen on using it for every little thing, this is merely annoying. QR codes are definitely convenient, but limiting options to access information also communicates a clear message. that this space wasn't created for people who can't afford smartphones. So let's now say that you go to the grocery store. Surely the grocery store is made for everyone in the community. Kroger's trademarked ethos is literally fresh for everyone. Well, the stores put the security cameras by the baby formula. Now, Kroger may justify that the security cameras are in the aisles where the frequent shoplifting occurs or that host the more expensive products. Sure, but the cameras aren't in the candy aisle or by the $30 olive oil or in the healthy snack sections or by the beer. Laundry detergent and baby formula aren't luxury products. And as far as I know, there isn't a lucrative black market for Pampers. No, these are essentials. If you're stealing laundry detergent or diapers or baby formula, you are likely desperate. But in that moment, the dire need to nourish an infant or to wash clothing is not met with the acknowledgement that, wow, this is a problem. They are in crisis. These desperate folks are instead met with the threat of criminal action. As if a parent not being able to afford formula means that a baby deserves to go hungry. I get that Kroger is a business, but if the issue of people shoplifting diapers is pervasive enough to justify expensive security equipment, perhaps capitalism isn't really working here. So yes, of course, capitalism impacts business, but also each and every aspect of our society. Capitalism and wealth building are not 9-to-5 jobs. Capitalism thrives on constant, ubiquitous, brutal exclusion. For lower income, lower resource, or simply down on your luck folks, you can have all the hustle in the world, but the physical spaces around you will still challenge your right to live and work as easily as the rich. I've truly barely scratched the surface here, so I implore you, observe your community, your local businesses, your local planning department, and consider the messaging behind the physical spaces. The lights that illuminate the road, but not the pedestrians. The differing speed limits in high and low income residential communities. Find a location in your city and figure out who it was designed for and who it was designed to exclude. Physical spaces communicate a message of who is welcome here, who is safe here, who this space is really made for. Physical spaces criminalize and demonize the poor.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Our next speaker is Kierstyn Worthem, a master's student of higher education in the School of Education. She's the owner of Sweet Mango, a soap and lip gloss business, which is really, really cool. So let's make sure we support Kierstyn. Her talk is titled The American Bias. Implicit bias is often difficult to identify in our lives, but when we don't correct our bias, the decisions we make can have damaging consequences for others. This King Talk explores implicit bias, its harmful effects, and suggestions to rectify bias in our personal lives, with the hopes that leads to dismantling bias structures in America. Without further ado, Kierstyn.
Thank you, Aya. I have a riddle for you. And if you've heard this one before, don't give it away in the chat. If you figure it out, don't say it just yet. Here it is. 3 doctors said Pete is their brother. Pete said he has no brothers. Who's lying? Just a few more seconds to think about it, and then we'll come back to the answers later. I want to tell you more about myself. I live in Sterling Heights. When I'm not in Michigan, it's easier to say I'm from Detroit. I previously went to a predominantly white institution in a small town in Indiana of just 5,000 students, surrounded by a white community. That was culture shock for me. Sterling Heights is closer to the city. There are more people who look like me, and my high school had a larger population of minority students than my undergrad college did. I soon realized my peers weren't experiencing culture shock in the same way as me. Many of them were from the surrounding area or similar environments. In the same way I was experiencing this new community, my classmates were experiencing what it meant to have a Black classmate, and some of them for the very first time. Maybe you can imagine my peers' reaction when I introduced myself as Kierstyn from Detroit. I'm going to assume that most of you are from Detroit, from a short drive away from Detroit. And so, as a Michigander, you're more familiar with the city than people who live in Indiana. So you know that Detroit is more than just the national headlines or the corrupt, dangerous place it's often portrayed to be in movies. But my classmates did not. I was spending a lot of time with my new friends, and they were getting to know my passions, my hobbies, my interests. And when I eventually told them I was from Detroit, for a split second, their face would show me the conflict and confusion happening in their head. Like the Kierstyn they were getting to know had disappeared right in that moment. A few of my peers would say things like, "You don't seem like you're from Detroit. You don't sound like you're from Detroit," or "I wouldn't have guessed that." I was telling my mom about these conversations, and she told me, "You're not from there. Don't tell them that." Simply because she understood any information I shared about myself was open for judgment. She knew how harshly people judged Detroit, and that some of my relationships may change because of my impromptu statement. For some, before they got to know me or understand a new culture, they decided they didn't need to. I was quickly put into a box, left to be unknown, and that hurt. And it hurt even more when I realized I do that too. Let's take a moment and return to our riddle. Have any of you figured it out yet? The answer is no one. The doctors are Pete's sisters. Now, maybe you got it right away, or maybe you were like me. This riddle had me stumped. I cannot get past the idea that these doctors were his brothers. This riddle invites you to make a judgment using information you already know about doctors. Unconsciously, I thought doctors are men. I'm sure some of you did too. It's one of the reasons why this riddle works. It took no effort for me to jump to this conclusion. We make judgments and decisions with less information often, without even realizing it. This is implicit bias. The Curran Institute at Ohio State University defines implicit bias as the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Now, when I first discovered this term, I thought, this sounds like a setup. You're telling me that stereotypes that can be racist, sexist, and discriminatory in other ways subconsciously guide my understanding. And scientists would say that means my brain is working correctly. Our brain processes billions of stimuli a day, and that is too much information to analyze one piece at a time to make decisions. And so the answer is, allow the subconscious mind to make quick calls on things all of the time, so it doesn't take too long. To do that, your brain has to create shortcuts. It uses information from music, TV, experiences, and even stereotypes to create what I'm going to call a box. When it's needed, information is retrieved from that box and decisions are able to be made in a matter of seconds. I imagine if this process was illustrated, it would look like this. This is me, and a list of things you know about me. And let's say this is your brain. In it are boxes that help you understand my identity and characteristics. What do you know about women? What do you know about people who live in Sterling Heights? What about people who wear glasses? When enough of us have boxes that look like this, We understand why 40% of people with perfect vision consider wearing glasses to an interview. Those who wear glasses are perceived as more professional and honest than those who don't. An employer's implicit bias may benefit me in this situation, but what if our boxes looked more like this? These are common stereotypes of Black women. They're harmful. When you're not a part of this community, you use what's available to understand. You create shortcuts to make decisions, you trust assumptions, and the thoughts in your box become your beliefs. You subconsciously accept them and allow them to fuel your attitudes, understandings, actions, and decisions. Such opinions encourage you to limit your interaction with those outside of your own communities. And all of this happens without an intentional thought. If we don't become aware of the implicit bias in our lives, we risk perpetrating toxic opinions about people and ignoring the impact bias has in our country. Implicit bias is in every area of our lives, including our technology. In 2019, hotel guests discovered a discriminatory soap dispenser that would not recognize dark skin. In 2017, a woman working in China realized that her colleague could unlock her iPhone using the face recognition feature. And in 2015, Google Photos mistook a photo of two African-American friends as gorillas. Now, how can this happen? Tristan Panch says there will probably always be some amount of bias because the inequities that underpin bias are in society already and influence who gets the chance to build algorithms and for what purpose. In other words, we can trace the problem through our technology to their human developers. We can trace any product or outcome to the people who created it. And along that line, we can find bias being transferred from one source to the next. We can't blame our technology. This is a human issue and it requires a human solution. How can we ensure that our bias isn't impacting the people in our lives? Well, it's everywhere. It's in our education, our policy, our healthcare. Implicit bias is built into every thread of America, and it makes it difficult for some people to be successful and live comfortably here. We can start to stop this by recognizing that we all live with implicit bias. And you shouldn't feel horrible. Most of the time, your brain is doing what it needs to function, but that doesn't mean it can't be corrected. Put yourself on what I call bias probation. Be intentional in reflecting on your own thoughts. When you catch bias in your thoughts, admit it and proceed with an appropriate statement. When you catch yourself vocalizing those thoughts, correct yourself out loud. It would take just a few seconds to tell someone, actually, I shouldn't have said that, or I have no reason to believe that, so that your bias impressions don't end up in someone else's box. Realize when you're counting on bias to draw conclusions. Let people show you who they are instead of deciding for them. And one day, when you empty a box of bias, I encourage you to live a life with an open mind, led by generous assumptions, until you fill it with your own experiences shared with people who identify with that box. Each of us can take responsibility in cultivating a country we can be proud of. This process may not be life-changing for people who wear glasses, but for a Black woman who was in a white town, told what she couldn't be because she didn't fit into a box, it can be life-changing. One box at a time, we can begin to rid America of its bias structures and attitudes. I challenge you to do the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Kierstyn. Our next speaker tonight is Chiamaka Ukachukwu, a PhD student in the Department of Pharmacology. An interesting fact about Chi-Chi is that she's pretty fast. She placed 5th place in both the 100-meter hurdle and triple jump in high school during a New Jersey state championship. In her free time, Chi-Chi loves to dance, especially to Afrobeats music. In her talk, I Too Am America, Chi-Chi reflects upon her identity as a female Nigerian-American scientist. Take it away, Chi-Chi.
I never embraced my identity as an American because I never felt proud to be American. I grew up watching whiteness glorified and placed on a pedestal. In school, the popular girls never looked like me. And when I went shopping, clothes were not designed to fit my curves. And on television, in magazines, everywhere I turned, whiteness was the standard of beauty. So I tried to mimic beauty standards that were set by white culture, failing miserably because, in case you can't tell, I am a Black woman. And what I didn't realize back then as a young Black girl was that I was being conditioned to hate my Black features because I didn't see myself reflected in conversations about beauty by the society that I grew up in. And in my professional life as a scientist in training, I again didn't see myself reflected in society's version of science. And people questioned my ability as a researcher and how I show up in academic spaces. And I remember one time when I joined a research lab after being introduced as a highly skilled biochemist with ambitions of pursuing a PhD, a colleague said to me, "You don't look like a scientist. I mean, why do you want to get a PhD? I don't know, you just don't seem very sciencey to me." And I remember thinking the worst part about that encounter was that they didn't even say that maliciously. They were genuinely perplexed and confused that I, looking the way that I do, wanted to be a researcher. And so it begs the question, what does a scientist look like? If I'm in the lab doing scientist, I am therefore a scientist and I look like a scientist. So thankfully, I never doubted my ability to become a scientist because I was raised by a Black mother with an earned PhD in organic chemistry from the Georgia Institute of Technology. And despite the challenges I faced as a Black woman scientist, whenever anyone questioned my place, it didn't really faze me because I'd already seen it done. In fact, growing up, I actually thought it was normal for Black women to get PhDs in the sciences, which is, yes, very laughable now. And when I started college at Georgia Tech, I quickly learned that that was not the case. And I often reflect on the fact that my mother, who was born and raised in Nigeria, was a young child before the Civil Rights Movement and before Georgia Tech desegregated in 1961. And for me, it's still shocking to think about that today because of how recent that history is. When she started her PhD program, she was, of course, the only Black woman and person in her program. And almost 40 years later, I am one of few, if not the only Black woman and person in many academic spaces as well. And as I subconsciously internalize these experiences, watching American culture disregard the humanity, the beauty, the intelligence of Black people, you can understand that I had absolutely no desire to claim this country. And so I pretty much ditched my American identity entirely when I joined the African Students Association in college. And I made friends with people who were unapologetically proud to be Black. And as I integrated into this community, I saw myself reflected in people who were highly educated, resilient, warm, and welcoming. And wearing our beautiful Ankara fabric, they walked as if the world's existence depended on their every step. And their self-love and the confidence were absolutely contagious. And I fell in love with my own Nigerian culture. And for me, embracing my culture meant rejecting America's flawed standards of beauty. It meant acknowledging and celebrating the beauty of my people and having unwavering pride and my origin. And so from then on, whenever anyone asked me where I was from, I proudly stated that I was Nigerian as my own act of revolution against the American culture that rejected me. So if we fast forward to a few years later, where two unsettling experiences occurred that literally forced me to claim my American identity. The first was when I moved to Belgium as a Fulbright research scholar. And when people asked me where I was from, I'd answer, I'm Nigerian. And they'd look at me puzzled, hearing my American accent with my American passport. After explaining that I was born and raised in New Jersey, I realized that saying I'm Nigerian as an international scholar meant something entirely different in this context. It implied that I was born and raised there, which, simply isn't true and isn't an experience I can relate to. So for the first time in my life, I began telling people I'm American, but I'm Nigerian American, because that qualifier was always needed for me. And then the second experience, and probably still the most unsettling experience to this day, is when I applied for the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship for New Americans. Twice, I didn't get it, by the way. But this fellowship celebrates the contributions that immigrants make to American society. And it honors the fact that America thrives because of the immigrant community and the positive impacts that they've made. And so I was so excited to apply because the mission embodied everything that I stand for, and it encompassed my family history. And so I sat down ready to crush these essays like, yes, let me tell you how amazing immigrants are. And then the first essay question reads, tell us about your experiences as a new American, whether as an immigrant yourself or as child of immigrants. How have your experiences as a new American informed and shaped who you are and your accomplishments? How have my experiences as a new American informed and shaped who I am? That's easy, hasn't been anything good. But the part that caught me was, and how has this shaped your accomplishments? And I'm like, there's nothing positive about my experiences of being American, and accomplishments are a positive thing. So I really had to pause and reflect. As someone who was born and raised here, there had to be some good somewhere, and I had to figure it out because I had to write a whole essay about it. And by definition, I am American. So I had to dig deep and think really, really hard. And it brought me back to my mom's story. During the Civil War in Nigeria, a consequence of colonialism by the British and global white supremacy that continues to exploit the African continent to this day, my grandmother fought ferociously, working extra jobs to pay for tutors so that my mom could continue her education because schooling was disrupted by the war. And as a result, my mom became the first in our family to go to college in an environment where oftentimes women were not encouraged to get an education, and women were seen as second-class citizens and expected to support and uplift the men in society, where men would question, what do you need to go to college for? Or grad school, just get a husband and let him take care of you. And she loathed being in toxic and patriarchal environments, and that men were elevated in society for no reason at all other than existing. And if you know anything about my mother, she challenged anyone who questioned her place by excelling, getting into the most prestigious college in Nigeria, the University of Ibadan, and then getting into Georgia Tech for her PhD program. And she used her opportunities in America to become a respected scientist, educator, and advocate for marginalized groups around the world. And she used her resources to improve her communities, which are all traits that I've proudly inherited. It's because my mother challenged oppressive climates as a Nigerian woman that I was raised to challenge authority when people are mistreated and to be outspoken about issues that I care about. And so I use my own challenges to advocate for and uplift others as well. For example, as a Fulbright scholar, I co-founded Fulbright Noir, a platform to support Black American ambassadors navigating anti-Blackness overseas. And as a grad student, I've dedicated most of my extracurricular work to increasing representation of women and Black scholars in STEM. And if I witness someone being unfairly treated, it doesn't matter what or who is involved. You can ask anybody that knows me. I'm gonna be the one to speak up. And if challenging institutions and authority figures when they're wrong or being unjust isn't the most American thing I can do, then I really don't know what is. So as I reflected on this essay question, I realized that my unwillingness to identify as American is a paradox. I owe my opportunities, tenacity, outspokenness, and ability to create positive impact in my communities to America. And while this certainly does not negate my negative experiences as a Black woman in this country, from racism, discrimination, police brutality, you name it, I am actively working to embrace the fact that my story is American and my mother's story is American. And when being American includes being a Black immigrant who actively works to dismantle patriarchal and racist structures and uses their voice to uplift others, then I can be proud to say, I too am America. So if I can leave you with one message from my story, it would be this: remember that your story and your history matter, and that you have power and agency to improve your communities. So hold space to honor the truths about America, the good and the bad, and know that you are a part of the good in this country. And that is always something that's worth celebrating.
Thank you so much, Chi-Chi, for sharing your story with us. Our next speaker is Sarah Burch. Sarah is a master's student in the Educational Equity, Justice, and Social Transformation program in Michigan School of Education. Now, Sarah's fun fact is she is currently writing a historical novel about the only battalion of Black women deployed overseas during World War II, the 6888 Central Coastal Division. Now, that is really impressive. Sarah's talk is titled, Black Excellence is Exhausting. Black excellence is a phrase that expresses the joy and pride within the Black community when a personal or professional achievement is reached. However, what often does not share is the mental and emotional fatigue that goes hand in hand with said excellence. But there are always ways to curb those feelings of exhaustion, and Sarah will share 3 inclusive and accessible tips to do so. Sarah, take it away.
Good evening. I'd like to invite you all to take a look at this slide and think about what these numbers might have in common. I promise not to quiz you, nor is this a mathematical question. More so, reflect on what you believe to be the theme or statistic behind the numbers. I'll give you about 5 seconds to reflect. These numbers happen to reflect some key figures and statistics about the current state of Black college student mental health. Let me break it down for you. 70%. 70% of Black college students said that access to mental health services have been harder to visit and experience as a result of the pandemic. With 51% of Black students saying that they felt overwhelmed their first semester of college. With 40% of college students saying that in this past year alone, they've oftentimes felt too anxious to function or even get out of bed. 15 minutes is the amount of time asked of college students to either sit in silence or receive an electric shock. College students chose electrocution. And second, by 2018, suicide was the second leading cause of death for people between the ages of 10 and 24. And before I move on, I do want to hold space to share a resource that's free. If you or someone you know has had thoughts of self-harm, please seek help. When Rackham asked graduate students interested in participating in the King Talks to reflect on the theme, This is America, I immediately thought of the mental, emotional, and physical health crisis myself and other Black college students are experiencing. However, even in the midst of this crisis, I did want to share some images that speak to my own joy within my journey on Black excellence. Which Black excellence I also define as being the acknowledgement of centuries of exploitation, oppression, and abuse to have the audacity and the ability to rise and prosper despite. And it looks like my slides won't be able to show you everything, but these pictures behind me are actually a gift from my grandma. She definitely is a true definition of Black excellence. And this picture that I have right here on my laptop is of my son, Isaiah. Lifting him up and raising him to be proud and know of his heritage is the definition and embodiment of Black excellence. And even in the midst of the joy, that initial crisis that I was speaking of, that those statistics showed, it's exhausting. To think that students are in the midst of a nationwide racial reckoning and social justice movement, and to also be navigating the academic pressures of deadlines, exams, microaggressions, racism, familial responsibilities, work study, or other jobs. And yet, Black students are still achieving and accomplishing beyond their ancestors' wildest dreams under this beacon of Black excellence. However, what the hashtag and social media highlight reels don't often show, shout out to Relive the Bar, is that physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion that goes hand in hand with said excellence. And by all means, people within the Black community should continue and will continue to strive for excellence. But in the state of our nation, especially when you are a high-achieving minority student at a predominantly white institution, exhaustion is all too common. So I want to use this platform today to equip you with the tools to achieve and maintain that excellence while curbing the feelings of exhaustion. Tip number 1, every student needs mentors and a therapist. I encourage you to seek out and network with your peers, professors, folks doing work in spaces that you enjoy or want to be in. I had a light bulb moment in one of my classes this semester when my professor, Dr. Wilson, introduced us to the concept of having multiple mentors. That there will be people in your life for your professional accountability, things like internship and resume help, as well as personal mentors who can ground you spiritually and in your values. I significantly remember one conversation with an adjunct lecturer who I just sat there and sobbed in her office, but it was the most empowering conversation about purpose and passion and values. And not only was I there for her, but she was there for me. And as far as a therapist, I would encourage you to be proactive and preventative in your mental health. Personally, I was exhausted when I went through some of my darkest days in the middle of my first master's degree, working sometimes 12 or 16-hour midnight shifts at the hospital, while also navigating through her divorce and trying to raise my son. So when I found myself in therapy after going through that divorce that dropped me at rock bottom really hard, it felt like I had failed. But I learned through therapy this rebuild of my life meant that I was worth working on. And Central Student Government here on campus has funding available and platforms online to help students find identity-based providers. There are groups like Nourish for self-identified women of color, a committee that I have been a part of for the past 4 years that hold and uplift space for these women, students, staff, and faculty to come together and build this community. And My Brothers is a community for self-identified men of color. So please seek out that network. For tip number 2, I would be remiss as a yoga teacher if I didn't encourage you to incorporate 5 minutes of movement, mindfulness, or meditation into your day, every day. I'm sure you all know we live in this toxic productivity culture, meaning we are always on the go, going from class to work to the library, to a student org meeting to the gym, back to class or work, not to mention finding time to eat, sleep. What's a hobby? See friends. We aren't present. We're rushing an experience and an opportunity to enjoy these years of growth and development mindfully. One of my favorite podcasts, because anyone who knows me knows that I listen to podcasts all the time, It's called Balanced Black Girl. And she said something one day that just shook me to my core. She said, we can choose to work at a pace that doesn't pull us apart. We, not our parents, not our partner, not our kids, not our coworkers. You have the power to choose that pace. So the idea is to start with 5 minutes of any of these in your day and eventually be doing all 3 for 5, 10, 15 minutes. And I guarantee you, you will feel different. Now, this advice isn't meant to treat or diagnose clinical depression or anxiety. More so, the brain is a muscle, just like any other part of your body. So when you train it with meditation, slow breathing, where you focus on your inhales and your exhales. Matter of fact, let's practice right now. At home, I invite you to place one hand on your chest and the other palm in the center of your belly. Now close your eyes and turn inward. And as you inhale, noticing how the air is cool. Pause at the top and slowly exhale, noticing how your body heats that air. If you haven't done so already, you can open your eyes. I encourage you to pause like that at any time. Other ways to incorporate tip 2 is by using mindfulness to complete tasks or being present. For example, when's the last time you actually ate a meal and you weren't scrolling through social media on your phone? I'm also talking to myself. And I was actually on my SoulCycle bike at home when an instructor shouted at me that mindfulness isn't about controlling your thoughts. It's about not letting your thoughts control you. And when I say incorporate 5 minutes of movement into your day, this doesn't mean midnight shopping for your own SoulCycle bike. But 5 minutes of movement could be stretching in the morning before you get out of bed. Or for those of you who are watching and are real beginners, no shade to that. We all start from somewhere. Even just dancing to a song, just moving. And I recognize these all sound small and perhaps inconsequential, but no cap. They add up when you do them together and a little more each day. Pictures, just expressing all that. Tip number 3, say no. That's it, that's the slide. Joking. But if no one has ever told you before, no is a complete sentence. Now, full disclosure, I know I got friends and family watching, shaking their head at me right now, but I'm gonna call it out. This is a concept I know I still struggle with. But when I saw this reframed as self-harm against myself, when I overcommit or overexert myself, saying yes to everything, even if it's really cool and exciting, I pause. Because thinking about it in that context really reframes it for me. And Healthy Minds, a national survey based out of U of M, recently collected data that speaks to the added exhaustion students of color feel on visibly being at the forefront of the social justice movement. I bring up that statistic to name that just because you may be the only Black or person of color in your class or place of work does not mean you have to participate or lead out DEI or anti-racism efforts, especially, and this part's important, if it means doing so without monetary or other forms of compensation. I've read article after article of Black women shouldering the brunt of this hard but necessary work without pay, working longer hours in addition to their regular duties. Hell, I was one of them at one point. But I will tell you this right now, for the record, I will never do that again for free. It's important to acknowledge that these steps I have not perfected, nor by any means are they tools that can be perfected, or will they outright eliminate exhaustion from Black excellence. My hope is instead that of perfecting these habits, you can be gentle with yourself as you form new ways of coping. I would encourage you to reframe these tools through a lens of mastery, meaning perfection isn't the goal, but confidence, autonomy, knowing you have the power and control to tap into these strategies at any time, that you'll get better at them over time. I repeat, you can choose to work at a pace that does not pull you apart. Black excellence is exhausting, but it doesn't have to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Now, last but certainly not least, we're going to conclude this evening with our final speaker, Aja Harris-Martin. She's a PhD student in the Department of Learning Health Sciences, Health Infrastructure, and Learning Systems. What a mouthful. In her talk, The Story of Health Disparities, Equity in America, Aja examines the historical basis for racism as an infrastructure in America and how it has caused the health disparities we are experiencing in our nation today. In her free time, Aja enjoys car karaoke and spending time with family and friends. While she majored in engineering and pivoted to public health for her graduate studies, as a child, she coincidentally wanted to be a writer, nurse, teacher, inventor in kindergarten. Take it away, Aja.
Thank you. I want everyone to take a moment to think about your favorite story. Feel free to share it with me using the chat if you are able. For me, my all-time favorite book series is The Hunger Games. And I will argue with anyone as to why I believe Suzanne Collins is the Shakespeare of our time. My undeniable love of stories truly began around the 4th or 5th grade. If you ask anyone that knew me during this time, they will likely tell you I always had a book in hand. I enjoyed the feeling of getting lost in a fictional story, imagining myself narrating or observing the events written on the page. More recently, I have begun to love history books, memoirs, autobiographies, and biographies. Although the experience of reading sci-fi and nonfiction are completely different, any literary scholar or 4th grader can likely tell you every good story is comprised of 5 parts. We have come to know this as the plot diagram. First, you have the exposition or beginning, then some rising actions, then a climax, some falling actions, and the resolution or ending. The exposition, climax, and resolution work together to build suspense to create a unified storyline called the plot. In fiction books, the last page, it denotes the end of the story, and the storyline of the characters are over. But in nonfiction books, while the last page may denote the end of the book, the story actually continues. Every day, we are each living a nonfiction story and continuing a story that predates us. We each make individual decisions that impact our lives and the lives of many others. At the same time, we are inheritors of a collection of stories from our families, our communities, our nation, and all of humankind. Some of these stories are initiated by us, whereas others are inflicted upon us. This is the paradox of life. Now, I want to continue by sharing a few short stories. They are not my story per se, but they are stories of this country, where we've been, where we are, and most importantly, how I hope our story continues. First is the story of repression. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, marking the beginning of America's war against indigenous populations, American Indians, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians. This was later coined the Indigenous Holocaust. Researchers estimate that over 175 million deaths were caused by war, repression, and harsh conditions. Today, American Indians and Alaska Native persons die from alcohol-related causes 6.6 times more than the general US population. Next, a story of exploitation. In 1619, the first documented stolen enslaved Africans arrived in Jamestown, Virginia. From the mid-1800s to the 1990s, cruel medical experiments on Black bodies were widespread throughout America. including electric shocks, brain surgery and amputations without anesthesia, unethical clinical trials, and the development of modern gynecological procedures. Harriet A. Washington provides additional context in her book, The Medical Apartheid. Today, Black women are 3.5 times more likely to die of pregnancy-related causes than white women. And Black infant mortality is 2 times higher than that of white infants. Finally, a story of exclusion. In 1882, America passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, effective until 1964. And more recently, the Department of Homeland Security has been enforcing stricter Border Patrol laws, detaining over 500,000 people every year, the majority of whom are Haitian and Mexican immigrants. Today, Chinese, Mexican, and Haitian immigrants are excluded from health insurance at disproportionate rates. 25% of documented immigrants and 46% of undocumented immigrants are uninsured, compared to just 9% of uninsured American citizens. These 3 stories provide evidence that we can attribute many of the existing health disparities in our country to our stories of repression, exploitation, and exclusion. These events have exacerbated the effects that we are continuing to experience from our COVID-19 pandemic story. Today, Indigenous, Black, and Hispanic persons are about 2 times more likely to die from COVID-19 when compared to white persons. But where did this story begin? The US government has acknowledged 16 critical foundational plots that are the underpinning of our broader American story. We have come to know these as infrastructures. Infrastructures from hospitals to plants, dams, water facilities, transportation systems, the internet. Critical infrastructure supports every aspect of our daily lives. But there is one infrastructure that the US government has failed to acknowledge until more recently: racism. Racism was the beginning of our American story. Racism is an infrastructure that perpetuates inequities and disparities across all 16 of our existing critical infrastructures. And until we decide to end this story of racism, it will continue to be the primary foundational plot in all of our stories. So how can we end this plot of racism? First, we acknowledge it. In healthcare, racism as an infrastructure does not only materialize itself as health disparities, it is also recognized in the underrepresentation of minority medical providers, the unconscious and conscious bias that leads to discriminatory care practices, and limited access to high quality healthcare in many urban and rural settings. At the 1966 Medical Committee for Human Rights meeting, Dr. King is quoted saying, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and most inhuman because it often results in physical death." More than 50 years later, we are finally beginning to listen to the story King was trying to tell. Today, across the country, many local, state, and federal organizations and governmental agencies have declared racism a public health crisis. This is an attempt to advance racial equity and justice by acknowledging racism as an infrastructure. So we have all of this, but then what? We established a new plot. The beauty of our nonfiction life stories is as one story ends, another is just beginning. Rather than continuing to let racism as an infrastructure be inflicted upon us, we as a society have the collective power to initiate a different story if we choose. As we work to end this plot of racism, we can begin to outline a new plot for our American healthcare infrastructure. Health equity. Health equity is achieved when everyone, regardless of their race, sex, and socioeconomic status, can attain their full potential for health and well-being, eliminating inequalities resulting from differences in health and overall living conditions, as defined by the World Health Organization. So we have this new plot of health equity. Now what? We create an outline. The ideal time and setting would be after a devastating climax that revealed the repulsive disparities exacerbated by racism. After this crisis, there would be a narrow window of opportunity to rebuild differently. And if you haven't guessed it, I believe COVID-19 is the climax of our current story. The main ideas and actions needed in this outline would be to first embed social determinants of health within our medical care infrastructure. Social determinants of health are the conditions where people are born, live, learn, work, play, worship, and other forces that affect a wide range of health outcomes. Next, we establish and commit to anti-racism policies to begin combating the negative effects and detriments that racism as an infrastructure has caused. And finally, to restore our broken American healthcare infrastructure, we shift to a national learning health system where we can systematically integrate internal data and external evidence to continually improve and strengthen equity by putting new knowledge into practice. The main characters in these stories are at different levels, individual, community, and national, from different disciplines: the government, engineering, education, sociology, public health, infrastructure science, implementation science, urban planning, public policy, technical trades, law, and you. So this is our story. Stories of where we've been, where we are, and most importantly, how I hope our story continues. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence initiated our American story. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. However, the undoubted reality of this country is that all characters are not treated as equal. The undoubted reality of our country is that we have not ended this plot of racism, and it continues to perpetuate inhuman disparities in many of our critical infrastructures, because racism is an infrastructure. But there is hope. Together, we can mobilize the elimination of racialized health disparities in an effort to ensure that alongside life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, health equity becomes an unalienable right for all. While we cannot rewrite the stories of yesterday, we can turn the page and create an outline for how the story can continue, with health equity as an infrastructure becoming the new plot in our subsequent stories. And if we are able to do that, that will become my favorite story. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Aja, for closing our show. And to everyone, thank you all for coming out. That concludes our 5th annual King Talks. We really appreciate our graduate student speakers and their opportunity here to share their stories and visions for the future. Chloe and I have worked really, really hard with them, and we really enjoyed mentoring our 6 amazing student speakers over the past 3 months.
We have really enjoyed this experience, and we hope that you all sitting at home tonight have also enjoyed each of our presenters' interpretations of the event's theme, This is America. Recordings of all the talks you heard tonight will be available soon, but in the meantime, you can watch previous year's King Talks like the ones given by students like me and Aya on the Rackham website. The links will also be emailed to all registrants. So thank you and have a wonderful rest of your evening, everyone.